all is used by scammers. Atisha was very surprised by this. The man added that a real fortune teller would not work in such a place. He suggested finishing the meal and getting out of here. The girl was a little worried. It seems like it's all a lie, but didn't she say good things about her fate? Does Cayenne have secrets from her? Should he share them with her? Duke of the North? A war hero and a man who left his mistress to save his future wife. All she knows about him are rumors and unobvious things. Now she realizes that she knows nothing about Cayenne. What kind of person is he? What was his life like before her? What does the guy think about? What does he want? Atisha wants to know everything. The girl wanted to start eating, so she began to pray. It seemed to her that all her wishes had come true. I thought that I would just have to wait for the day of my death. But the longer she is around him, the more she wants to know about him. The girl decided to take one of the candies from the basket, and then Cayenne asked her, "Didn't Atisha say that she has no more desires?" The girl smiled awkwardly, unwrapping the candy. Miss replied that she thought there was still some left. "This is weird." The Duke exhaled and said that not at all. The girl's cheeks turned red. Atisha put that same golden candy in her mouth and thought it was very tasty. Sweeter than she thought? The girl asked her to fulfill her wish. The next day, Atisha and Duke Cayenne have come to a portal that will send them north. They stood up to him, and Atisha said that she hoped they wouldn't worry. Cayenne replied that she should not worry, he had contacted them. They will be met. Atisha closed her eyes from a bright flash of light, and suddenly they were already standing in the middle of the snowy mountains. The girl could not believe that she was standing in the middle of such beauty, cold and beautiful. This is the land of the Duke of Wintel. Now, having left the Heinz mansion, she feels alive again. No one will torture Atisha here, neither Larian nor her parents. She no longer needs to return to the house from which she tried so hard to escape. The man called Lady Atisha and said that it was cold here and asked her to come to him. The guy stopped for a second. He remembered how yesterday she was so sincerely happy about the chocolate bunny. Now she is also sincerely and childishly happy, either that she is in the north or that she is far from the Heinz house. Behind him, the Duke heard the voice of his assistant, Val de Prame. The man turned and saw Judith running towards him, saying that he was late and how she was waiting for him. She suggested that he quickly go to the mansion. Preparations for the banquet are completed. Cayenne pushed her away from him and asked what kind of banquet they were talking about. The girl told him that the lady had planned a banquet. She became involved with him after hearing the news of his marriage. The man asked if we were talking about his mother. Dith added that the guests will arrive soon. Atisha L. looked at them from the side and did not believe that she felt jealous. But she soon convinced herself that she had no need to be jealous. That's right, the Duke has Dith. Everything is fine. She was originally just a fake duchess. She is happy that she was able to walk this path with him. It must be nice to know that they are waiting for him here. Is it normal that she is jealous of Judith? That's why Atisha doesn't regret her wish. Duke Cayenne brought her out of her thoughts. The man called her name, and the girl turned to him. The Duke said that he heard that his mother was giving a banquet today. Atisha asked again. The guy replied that initially they had a day to prepare for it, but they arrived late and there was almost no time left. He added that Atisha should also attend the banquet, and asked if she would mind. The girl looked down and said that she would. She thought that she would soon disappear. The only ones who will remain here are the Duke and Dith. Atisha should be grateful to Dith. If the Duke hadn't had to look for the fake duchess, she would have remained at the Heinz estate. The girl declared that she would attend the banquet as the one who would become the Duchess of Wintel. Val de Prame told the Duke that they needed to go to the banquet as soon as possible. Cayenne of Wintel said that it was good and asked if anything had happened while he was away. The assistant replied that he had followed all his instructions. The Duke ordered him to come to him when the banquet was over. There is a separate assignment for him. Val de Prame declined and said that as he pleased. The Duke followed to the carriage. Atisha was already excited to see the Wintel's estate. The carriage moved. They drove along a road through a dense and snowy forest. Atisha, looking out the window, thought that the view from the window was very beautiful. She turned to the Duke and asked what mountain this was. Cayenne didn't understand what she was talking about. The man looked out the window and the girl pointed to a huge mountain. Cayenne of Wintel replied that she would understand when they got there. The girl looked more closely and was very surprised. It turned out that this was not a mountain, but the Wintel's estate. The carriage arrived at the castle. The Duke opened the door and offered his hand to Lady Atisha. The girl gave him her hand in response, but it was not Atisha but Judith. She thanked Duke Cayenne. The man abruptly removed his hand and rudely called her by her full name. The girl blushed a little. She said she had to go. The lady told her that she had bought her a new dress. The girl noticed that the lady was taking good care of her. Sometimes she even gives her something. She turned to Baroness Atisha and said that they would see each other at the celebration. Atisha blushed a little at her words and began to get out of the carriage. She asked the Duke if Dith was also invited to the banquet. The man replied that his mother had given Dith special permission. Atisha is sad. A mother who cares for her son's mistress like an azalea. Well, the Duke said that Dith is Wintel's weakness. She still doesn't understand him. They went to his estate and Kayan turned to her to say something. The man said that he would pick her up before the banquet. Atisha replied that it was good. The servants offered to take her to her room. She followed him. The girl thought that no matter how you looked at it, it was strange. The banquet shouldn't happen so suddenly. Even when Larian threw a small party, preparations took at least a week. Atisha suddenly realized, perhaps it's all because her son brought his bride home and announced the wedding right away? The girl thought that the lady was probably angry. She organized a sudden banquet wanting to express her concern in this way. Atisha L is a lady who has no name in high society and a son who has such merit. He is going to marry someone whose identity is unknown. Surely at the banquet she wants to find out what kind of person Atisha is. The girl had never been to this kind of event before. She suddenly introduced Larian, who said to let her tell her about high society. Atisha exhaled. Under no circumstances should she screw up at the banquet. Guests at the event were whispering about Atisha Hines, the lady who will become Duchess of Wintel. They had never heard of her before. The invitees informed each other that the girl was no longer Hines. Now she is a baroness. They heard that this title was bestowed by the emperor. And how can a baroness become the wife of a duke? This is all very strange. The duke does not often visit the capital. 3 years ago he went to war. The guests do not think that his meeting with the baroness was an accident. The guests really wanted to know the whole story and wondered who could tell them. Countess Monmouth apologized to Madame Cyrillaise and said that she must know much more than they do. Cyrillaise was a past duchess. Before her marriage, her name was well known in the capital's high society. After the wedding, she led the north. In other words, she is the queen of northern high society. The lady leaned over and told the countess that she didn't quite understand what she was talking about. The guests continued to have fun, and Dance Monmouth got nervous. Mrs. Cyrillaise thinks they are all mistaken. Today's banquet is dedicated to the Duke's marriage. They wanted to share this happiness with them, so they organized a banquet. Cyrillaise hopes that no one will fuss over rumors during the holiday. Suddenly, it was announced that the Duke of Cayenne and Baroness Atisha L had arrived at the celebration. The guests dispersed to make way for Madame Cyrillaise. Cayenne of Wintel bowed his head and asked his mother how her health was. Atisha bowed, introduced herself, and said that she was glad to meet her. Mrs. Cyrillaise looked at her with contempt, and Atisha thought that she seemed furious. The girl looked at the Duke out of the corner of her eye, but he stood calmly, smiling a little. Mentally, she asked the Duke if everything was okay, but then the lady approached her. She greeted her and said that she heard that Atisha was going to marry her son. Atisha smiled and said that the Duke accepted her marriage proposal. Mrs. Cyrillaise did not understand what a marriage proposal meant. The girl explained that she was the first to propose marriage, and the Duke agreed. The Queen immediately said angrily that this was simply incredible. Atisha realized that she had said something wrong. She turned around to look at the Duke's face at that moment. He remained the same, smiling. The girl didn't understand why he was smiling. Maybe the Queen will believe her and let her stay? The girl forced herself to think what to do. Atisha clenched her fists tightly. She knew she needed to prove herself. A celebrity always attracts attention, and the words she utters will reach everyone's ears. Atisha L offered her hand to the mistress and asked if she had the honor of inviting her to the first dance. Usually, the partner for the first dance is chosen by someone from the family, and for the second with a lover. An invitation to the first dance shows that she wants to be part of her family. Even if Atisha is refused, she will be able to dance with the Duke. If she dances with him, she will be able to attract attention, to such an extent that no one will be interested in his mistress. The lady replied to the Baroness that this was a stunning proposal. Atisha L thought she would say that Cyrillaise continued to think about the offer of a first dance with her. But then, unexpectedly, Judith entered the hall, and all attention fell on her. The guests began to gossip that this girl could be the same mistress of the Duke of Cayenne. People didn't understand what she forgot here. They thought that perhaps someone had invited her. Dith approached Miss Cyrillys and thanked her for inviting her. The queen replied that she was pleased to see Judith at the banquet. Atisha thought that she was invited by none other than Mrs. Cyrillys. She did not accept the Baroness's offer to dance, but immediately decided to greet her mistress. Grandpa was upset because it was supposed to be a celebration of marriage. The Duke helped her sever all ties with the Heinz family, and in return she was to become a fake duchess. That was their deal. But now the mistress greeted Judith in front of everyone. This means she can be close to the Duke, the perfect plan. Does he really need a fake duchess? Now everyone looks at her as if she were a lonely island in the sea. A distant island that no one would even think of setting foot on. Her role ends here. If only she knew it would all end like this. And she is stupid. She hoped that some candy could fulfill her wish. Atisha felt that she was in pain, bitter and unpleasant. Suddenly the Duke turned to his mother. The man said that she thoughtlessly invited Judith, and it didn't occur to her that Atisha would be unpleasant. Cayenne added that she should explain herself to the guests. The lady replied that she could not afford it. Duke Cayenne once again asked her to clarify this misunderstanding. Atisha was surprised that the Duke stood up for her. The girl looked at him, and in response the Duke only hugged him tighter. Those invited continued to wait to see what would happen next. The lady nevertheless replied that it seemed that it was still worth explaining. She raised this child as if she were her own. Even though she is a commoner, she sees Dith as her daughter, which is why she is here. Atisha L. was shocked and did not understand what it all meant. Cyrillys continued the story. When she learned that Cayenne had decided to get married, she felt it necessary to invite Dith to this banquet. Cayenne is her son, and Judith is her adopted daughter. It's normal for families to get together on such a beautiful day. The audience was shocked. They believed that Judith was Cayenne's lover, but not her sister. Then she moved on to Baroness Atisha. The woman apologized because it might have made her feel uncomfortable. Mrs. Cyrillys quietly added that she was happy to learn about Cayenne's marriage. Atisha couldn't believe it. The woman said that she could not sleep, so she suddenly arranged this banquet. Moreover, Cayenne arrived here a day later than planned. She was very worried. Finally, the lady added that she was sorry. She did this without thinking things through properly. Cyrillys extended her hand to Atisha L., inviting her to dance. The girl was glad that the mistress was not angry with her after all. Mrs. Cyrillys admitted that she was truly grateful for her desire to marry her son. She will be happy to dance, not the first dance. The girls walked out to the middle of the hall. The guests didn't even know that everything would be like this. The Duke's mistress turns out to be the adopted daughter of Mrs. Cyrillys. Obviously, they shouldn't get involved in this. Mrs. Cyrillys and Atisha L. began to dance the first dance at the banquet. The woman asked the Baroness to take care of her only son. She will do everything possible to help them with the wedding ceremony, so Atisha can ask her for anything. The girl thanked her and said that she would definitely contact her. Cyrillys was embarrassed that the girl called her mistress. She told her that she could call her mother. She won't mind. Atisha was very surprised by this. The lady asked her not to think anything bad. She didn't force her at all. She waited a long time for Cayenne to have a worthy girl and get married. The woman tried her best to find him a suitable bride, but Mother laid out 5 photographs of girls, contenders for the Duke's heart, on the table. She told the Duke that they were all good. The lady began to talk about the first girl but was refused in response. The woman was very upset because he didn't even look at them. Duke Cayenne turned around and said that he had business to do and left the room. Cyrillys lowered her head and said that she just hoped Cayenne would find someone he could feel at ease with. The mistress took Miss Atisha L's hands and looked her straight in the eyes. The woman admitted that she wanted her to become such a person for Cayenne, the one who will be his support for the rest of his life. Atisha hoped that this would be the case. It's time for the second dance between Atisha and Duke Cayenne. The man approached her. The Duke said that he thought that his mother was just shy. He added that she is even more happy about his marriage to Atisha than he is. The man bowed and offered his hand to the Baroness. The girl became embarrassed. The second dance is always reserved for your lover. They started their dance. Atisha told the Duke that she was surprised. She thought his mother was strict. She didn't think she would treat her well. The Duke replied that this only works within the family. Atisha realized that the reason Mrs. Cyrillys was treating her so well was because she would become her son's bride. But if it turns out that the marriage was a fake, the lady will not tolerate lies. Atisha L. closed her eyes tightly and told herself that this shouldn't happen. The couple finished their dance, and Atisha bowed slightly to the audience. Rumors quickly spread among the guests about a commoner who was sheltered and raised by Mrs. Cyrillese. They were discussing what Madame said she had picked her up for. Judith is not a pet. People noticed her beautiful hair and said that they too would like to raise such a commoner. But it was clear what would happen next if you let such a person under your wing. One woman said that she didn't know what she was doing, but she was clearly causing trouble for the Duke of Cayenne. There were rumors that she was his mistress. They won't know the truth. Maybe she tricked the Duke and became his mistress. The girl stood in tears. Miss Monmad came up to her and asked what happened. In response, she heard only the Duke's name. When Dith turned 12, she became the adopted daughter of Mrs. Cyrillese. From then on, she grew up in the castle with Cayenne like brother and sister. Duke Cayenne was educated as a nobleman, but Judith could not be near him because she is not from a noble family. She and Cayenne were so-called brother and sister, but while the guy became the ruler of the north, Dith continued to sit closed in the castle. Cayenne's heart was like a cold wasteland, nobody could melt it. Previously, he was not interested in relationships with any of the girls. And then Judith thought that it meant that the only girl next to him would be her. She used to think so, but now everything has changed with this Atisha. Mrs. Cyrillese invited her to a banquet. It seemed to her that the time had come to announce to the people that she and Cayenne had vowed to be brother and sister. But the first dance at the celebration, and even the second, did not become her star. Monmad told her to look, but Judith continued to stand without moving. Tears were about to roll down her face. She kept thinking about how she had been with Cayenne for so long. Monmad found it funny that the commoner ignored her words. After Mrs. Monmad did not receive any answer, she began to shout that this was impudence, and asked if Dith had gone deaf. She turned her fan and hit Judith in the face with all her might. The girl was screaming about how dare she ignore her. Does she really think she can call herself the Duke's daughter? Dith grabbed her burning cheek and still did not understand why she was hit. She started calling Cayenne and Mrs. Cyrillese, but Monmad had already swung at her, shouting that it was a shame and disgrace. She ordered her to kneel down and ask for her forgiveness now. Suddenly, a man stood in front of Judith, covering the girl with his body. He asked her to calm down, saying that today was such a wonderful day. They are at Wintel Castle at the Duke's wedding banquet. He asked if she was really going to beat the adopted daughter of Mrs. Cyrillese on such a day. The girl could not believe that Judith began to defend the Marquis of Hexien. Judith herself couldn't believe it. The man said Monmad shouldn't bother punishing her. He'll figure it out himself. Mrs. Monmad didn't even know what to answer, so she simply remained silent. Hexien leaned closer to her and said that he was worried that Mrs. Monmad would ruin her beautiful fan. Hexien grabbed Judith by the hand and forcibly pulled him along the castle corridor. The girl did not understand at all what was happening. Suddenly the Marquis stopped. He turned to her and told her that she should come back. Dith froze, not understanding what he was talking about. She looked at him up close and thought that he seemed very handsome. Those red eyes like blood and ashen hair. If Duke Cayenne looks like he stepped out of some fairy tale. The Marquis of Hexien is like a demon who seduces people, Judith asked again. The man replied that there was a place where they were waiting for her. She replied that Mrs. Cyrillese had invited her. This was the first banquet in her life. Hexien took her chin and asked what was wrong with her expression at the Duke's wedding celebration. He added that it looked pathetic. She didn't answer when called. The girl abruptly removed the Marquise's hand and shouted that she already knew this. Hexien said that he did not know why the lady called her to the banquet. The Marquis added that it was sad that it wasn't someone like her couldn't stay here. The girl asked all this because she is a commoner, and in response, Hexien laughed loudly. Miss Judith asked what made him laugh so much. Hexien replied that she was not prepared for anything. If she is the adopted daughter of Mrs. Cyrillese, then she should behave appropriately. And if she is Cayenne's mistress, you must play your part. The man told her that she could not stand it. He asked if she saw the elite at the banquet. This is what happens on the battlefield. Therefore, it is better for her to go back. Dith started screaming for him to tell her how to become Cayenne's lover, how to become a duchess. Meanwhile, at the banquet, Atisha L. met new ladies. One miss welcomed Atisha to the northern lands and invited her to come to their estate when the time appeared. Another girl invited her to a tea party. Atisha thanked her and said that she would definitely come. Her face was burning and it seemed like she had too much wine. As expected, it was a tough day. She thought that Judith was the Duke's mistress, but it turned out that she was the adopted daughter of the lady and Cayenne's sister. Usually royals don't really get involved with commoners, especially such important figures as the Duke. The girl understood why Duke Cayenne said that about Judith. She remembered his words that Judith was the Wintel's weakness, the existence of which needed to be hidden. Atisha wondered why Mrs. Siralesi decided to raise her. Is there something she doesn't know? Surely there are many things. After the banquet, Mrs. Siralesi approached the Baroness and said that she was good today. The girl thanked her, calling her madam. The woman had already started to say that she could call her mother, but suddenly she stopped. Atisha asked if it was true, but the lady replied that it was nothing and asked her to pretend that nothing had happened. Miss did not expect to see the strict Mrs. Siralesi with her gentle side. The girl was embarrassed and thought it was very cute. She apologized, saying she was sorry and calling the lady mom. Siralesi froze in surprise. Atisha thanked her again, but called her mother. The girl looked at the mistress and thought that looking at her, you might think that she was angry. But in reality, she is confused. The girl thought it was very cute. Atisha said that she was really happy that her mother received her with such cordiality. Siralesi replied that not everything is so smooth. The banquet was organized in a hurry. There are some shortcomings. Atisha said that she would try to become a good daughter-in-law to repay her kindness. She said that in that case the lady could also call her differently. Not a baroness, although she is still surprised by the title. She took her mother's hand, and the lady asked what to call her. Then Atisha replied that she was her daughter. With my daughter, Siralesi looked at her sternly and with embarrassment. The lady snatched her hand from Atisha's hands, but immediately realized and began to ask for forgiveness. She saw Kayan coming towards them and said that she had to go. She has so much to do. We need to prepare for the wedding and the bride's wedding dress and jewelry. All this has been kept in the Wintle family for several generations. We need to take care of all this. They must organize a luxurious wedding celebration that will go down in history. Siralesi added that it was already late and suggested we discuss this over tea tomorrow. The woman was very embarrassed, and Atisha was more and more touched by this each time. Finally, she called her daughter and immediately decided to leave the hall. The Duke said that his daughter-in-law appeared, and they immediately stopped paying attention to their son. Atisha calmed him down and said that his mother was very worried about him. The man looked carefully and added that he was going to introduce her to the castle after the end of the banquet, but it seems she drank too much. Atisha agreed with this. The Duke said that in that case, he would escort her to her room. Atisha was embarrassed. The man offered Atisha his hand and invited him to go with him. Kayan said that the mansion is quite big. It's easy to get lost in it. He asked her not to go alone, but rather to take a maid with her. The girl replied that it was good, and noticed that she still had so much to learn. Duke Kayan said that they are now in the main building, the very heart of the Winter Palace. There are small wings in the east and west. They are called the Snow Palace and the Dark One. The girl was surprised at such a strange name for parts of this palace. Kayan said that his parents live in the snow. Atisha suggested that Judith lives in the dark. The man replied that the dark part was empty at the moment. The Wintle's heir will reside there. Judith lives in a tower outside the castle. It's called the Star Tower. Duke Kayan said that Atisha's bedroom is on the 3rd floor of the main palace. The entire floor is hers. She can safely explore it. Atisha did not believe what she heard. Kayan said that to put it correctly, this is the Duke and Duchess's floor. They approached a huge door, and Duke Kayan said that this was her bedroom. Atisha was very surprised that there was only one entrance to the bedroom. In the capital, her room was opposite the Duke's room. Does it split further? Or do they really have one bedroom for two? The girl was afraid to find out the answer. The Duke said that since he had already shown he would retire to his office, he still needs to study the reports about what happened in the northern lands during his absence. The man wished him a good rest and left. The girl was left alone with an unanswered question that still remains to be found out. Meanwhile, Judith brought Hexion to the Star Tower where she lives. She invited him, and the Marquis asked if he could really be here. The girl looked down and said that there was no one else here. He laughed and said that it looked like Mrs. Siralesi had raised her in a greenhouse. If she wants to be like a society lady, she shouldn't behave like that. Hexion added that she did not receive the education due to the nobles, although she uses things of the highest quality. The man wanted to touch her things, but Dith cried out that Mrs. Siralesi had given them to her and told him not to handle them so carelessly. He looked at her dress and asked if the mistress gave it to her too. Miss Judith smiled and said, "Yes, this dress is great." Marquis Hexion replied that as expected she knew nothing. Dith screamed what he meant. The man asked if she had ever heard the story of the Imperial Canary.
Like this video. Hit the like button and subscribe for more videos.